In today's episode of the Telehealth Heroes podcast, I chat with psychologist Dr. Laura Forsyth, who shares her experience delivering therapy from her Caribbean vacation home, how she maintains her own mental health, and how other psychologists can adapt to the new way of providing care. Dr. Laura Forsyth, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for asking me to come.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. What's your training, your background, and why did you decide to get into psychology?
Okay, well, I decided to get into psychology when I wrote my 8th grade career paper on what did I want to be when I grew up. And I guess that I had the notion of being a psychologist because it was either psychologist or sociologist. I was kind of a serious kid in a way, but I'd had the experience of being in therapy, and one of the things that impressed me about the psychologists that I met, although I don't know if I could have articulated at the time, but it came to understand later that they pulled from all parts of their persons, their experience, their knowledge. That in working with someone, they were talking about biology and art and history and literature and neuroscience, and I was one of those little geeky kids that just was like, oh, this is so cool. I really like this, and went forward in that way.
Great. And where did you do your training?
I started out at Santa Clara University in San Jose, actually in Santa Clara, and they had a master's program there, and rapidly realized that I actually wanted to be in a doctoral program, and was terrified of the dissertation, so that's why I started initially with the terminal master's program, but went for it and ended up getting into UC Santa Barbara's counseling psychology program, which is now a combined psychology counseling / clinical / school combined model. But at the time that I went there, at the end of the 80s, it was counseling psych, and so did my doctorate there, involved in psychotherapy research, and got some great direct training as well too. I think one of the claims to fame for UCSB is that even though they are a research-based program and oriented towards training academics, they have really strong practitioner training and incorporated into that. So I didn't become an academic. I kind of jumped out and did the clinician and clinical supervisor role in my career going forward from there, and I've done a little college teaching along the way.
And I understand your specialty is in ADHD. Has it always been that case, or is that something you've evolved into over your time?
It's definitely something that I evolved into. I had no formal training in that, and since my specialty area is also college students and adults with ADHD, at the time that I went to graduate school, there wasn't even any real consideration of that. Again, we're talking back in the way back, late 80s, early 90s. But one of the the first professional job that I took after I became licensed was at one of our local community colleges here in Ventura County at Moore Park College, and the position was bridged part of the time providing mental health services through the Student Health Center, since in the California community college system, unlike, say, lots of other colleges, there are very few colleges that have freestanding mental health services. They're typically embedded within another service. And so at Moore Park, it was embedded within the Student Health Center. Good for access, by the way. They had the position bridged into the Disabled Students Program, and so, which at Moore Park is called Access. And what they were wanting to do was to have someone who could come in and provide ADHD and assessments for psychological conditions that would impact and create a disabling condition for students. So I had to teach myself about what does ADHD look like in young adults and not so young adults, because community colleges serve everybody, traditional college age on up. And that was the beginning of finding something that I was just like, oh, this is great. I could identify with it. It made sense. I really like working in sort of a kind of a practical brain behavior sort of way. And it just evolved from there.
And then how long have you been in private practice, and what made you decide to make the jump from working for a school or in a community setting to a private practice. And
Well, it was kind of a practical, pragmatic decision. I started in private practice in 2005 when it became clear that the college was not going to increase the funding for my position. It had started as part-time, half-time, with
mm,
the intention of becoming full-time, and college administration changed, and that wasn't they weren't going to do that, and I started a kind of a part-time private practice. And I think I was also teaching at that time. I was teaching a couple classes at the local Cal State Channel Islands, and so kind of doing a couple different things. And the practice was pretty small for a while. It, you know, less than 10 people, and just over time it grew. So for many years, I did half time at the college and half time practice.
and
And
are
that
you
was
are you full time in the practice now?
Yes, yeah, and
Yeah.
in 2018, um, I just I got to the point of where it was time to make that change, and unfortunately, some of that was driven by the finances of it. Um, it was just it was I could provide more for my family with fewer hours by going into in
Mm,
solely over to practice, and it was less strain to do
right.
that. I miss it. I miss the college, um, but it was a good choice for me.
hmm Now, as you got into this private practice setting, what were some of the biggest challenges you faced, and how did you overcome them?
Well, I think my story's not all that different from a lot of people who go into to practice from some kind of background where you're working for an agency or some other institution that takes care of the infrastructure, and that you have to learn to run a business.
Mm,
And so that kind of getting that set up, getting my own procedures in place. How do I do things, marketing, all that stuff. There wasn't anything unique about it, and fortunately, even in 2005 when I started, there was the beginnings of what is now this enormous offering of support, collegial support, and training, and suggestions and ideas about how to set up a private practice, how to do the business end of it. Well, actually, back then there really wasn't as much of it, but there was enough. There was enough, and so took advantage of it. I, you know, spent a lot of time researching things, talking to people, taking advantage of every free resource that was available online, trying stuff out, building a website, and fortunately, I had had some good experience in the clinical supervising that I'd done, and some other things that I'd done, of sort of setting up practices, or kind of procedural things, because when I was running the mental health counseling program at Moorpark, I wrote procedures, and so I was kind of like, okay, what do we need to do, and what's going to be my workflow? And I don't know if I thought about it that formally, but it that kind of stuff helped
right.
in setting things up. And so I did things on paper for a long time, and then I created all my own forms and all my own methods, and then I got off insurance panels when I realized that was like making me crazy and taking up too much time. And then went paperless, and then someplace I don't even know when I first signed up with DoxyMe. Oof. But people started asking me, moved away from the area, clients were moving out of the area but wanted to continue services, and that's when I put my foot in the water of doing telehealth.
Right. So was it you that moved out of the area, or was it your clients
No,
who
it
moved out of
was
the
a
area?
couple of clients, one in particular
Clients.
who I'd seen for a while, and he'd actually transferred. He was a community college student who then had
Mm,
come to see me in private practice, and then when he transferred to a UC up north, um, he tried, I worked with him to find a therapist there, because he's one of those people who was managing a really significant mood disorder. I'm really proud of this guy. I've worked with him on and
yeah.
off for a long time, and so he was trying to connect with a therapist, and not really, it wasn't gelling for him. And so I just remember one day he called and said, look, is there any way we could do this? Phone sessions, whatever. Uh, and at that time, the other strand that was starting for me is that my husband had bought a house, a vacation as a vacation rental and kind of a vacation, and secondarily a vacation house for our family on Grand Turk Island in the Turks and Caicos in the British West Indies. And so
Wow.
I have these fantasies about, could I work from there? How do people do this? And so I remember actually, I had this distinct memory of listening to a podcast where another psychologist was talking about remote work and travel and how he did this, and in this sort of little seed is planted in the back.
Yeah.
Could this happen? So then about somewhere around, and then my client had asked about doing this, and those two strands kind of came together, and that was the impetus to say, okay, let me try to do this. Let me try telehealth.
So let me ask: are you in Turks and Caicos right now, having this
No,
interview?
no,
Oh, too bad. That would have been nice.
sorry. No, let me. Yeah, it would look different. It would look different, and it'd be fun to talk about that in a little bit more, because in the last year since the country reopened in August of 2020, after the first lockdown in the pandemic, we've been back and forth from there. I probably spent 6 months out of the last 12. We just got back a couple weeks ago. But no, my setup there looks pretty different than this
Yeah,
one.
yeah.
This
You
is
like
my
coconuts and stuff,
stuff, and I'll be comfy, and a really fast internet connection, which I don't enjoy in a developing country.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. No, I'd love to hear more about that. Like, so as you decided to uh, dip your toe in the water, figuratively and literally, what were some of those challenges that you faced that maybe were unexpected that you came and hit head on that, wow, I got to figure this one out?
Um, well, there's always a learning curve with a new thing, um, and I don't know. Been it's been at least 5 years. I d- it and some of it was the technology and working that out. Some of it was really mundane stuff like, oh, I'm squinting a lot. Oh, wait, I need to get computer distance glasses, because of
Right.
us old folks and progressives and this little teeny part that's the computer. Anyway, that I don't know. There wasn't anything insurmountable.
Mhm.
I mean, I got if every time I had a problem, I'd look it up.
Right.
Every time I had a problem, I was like, okay, what do people do about this? And every time that I did that, I'd find something that was, sooner or later, I'd find some kind of solution. If I wasn't getting a strong enough connection, I like, oh, wait, if you get a Wi-Fi extender and plug the Ethernet cable into that, because in my office it's too far away to run a cable out to the router in the waiting room, cleaned up the problem. If just each time there was something,
Right.
then there are people who are really willing to share their experience and wisdom, and I've really been the beneficiary of that. You just have to look for it and ask.
Right. And do you share your experience, besides this podcast, but do you share your experience with others who are endeavoring the same?
Oh yeah,
Uh,
and again here too, it happens really organically. One well, back in March of 2020, when over a 2 or 3 week period, almost everybody went online. Um, I and a lot of other people found ourselves in the position of responding to the queries that helped me
yeah.
coming out through like a professional associations. I'm active in the Ventura County Psychological Association, or my friends, office mates. It just kind of worked up organically, and I'm really proud of those people, because there are a lot of a lot of my psychologist friends, and I would assume non other mental health providers as well too. I'm just dialed into the psychologists through my professional association. Didn't have any background in going online to provide services. Lots of people were still, they had perfectly good infrastructure that was set up. They're using paper charts. They've got a good system. They're using it. Lots of people my age aren't necessarily all that familiar with Skyping at all, or
Right.
what we used to be called Skyping, now it's called Zoom, whatever. But
Yeah.
video conferencing, even informally with friends and family. So that transition to have to jump into and immerse into this was intense for a great many people, and they did it. They did it. And
Right.
now you don't hear, I don't see queries or hear people talking about how to do telehealth. What they're talking about is, hey, what do you guys know about interstate practice? And the questions have changed, the scope has changed as we've all evolved together.
So working from the Caribbean, did you run into any laws or regulations that you had to consider as you were doing this?
Um, I didn't run into anything because in the particular country that in the Turks and Caicos Islands, there are no regulations specific to that. So it's one of the things that would be regarded as not prohibited. A little shout out here to the folks at Person Centered Tech.
Mm.
And the trainings that they've had about interstate and international practice in terms of being able to go and do that research and trying to find out what are there laws or regulations that govern the practice of mental health services within the country. So I did do my homework ahead of time to figure out if that was an issue, and it was a little unsettling to find that there wasn't anything there. But that's also too why grateful to Ray Huggins and his crew at Center Tech, because they that format of, okay, there are things that are permitted, there's a regulation, you go through a process, you get permission, and then there are situations where it's not prohibited, where there just isn't anything there. I also had to check with my own board to see if there were any guidelines or considerations. And basically, California says what a lot of states say, which is you can do it if you are beholden to the laws of the locale where there is some kind of jurisdiction. You have to do it right.
So even though the patient is in California, you still had to, and you were in the Caribbean, you still had to consider that
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
that regulation. Yeah.
And because typically here in the United States, it's about where is the client located?
Right.
And but you still need to check with your own, your own licensing, and your own jurisdiction to see if there's some consideration. What California says may not be what every state says, and it's our responsibilities as providers to check that stuff out ahead of time. And maybe that's one thing too, where how healthcare is changing is that many more people have had to think about those issues, and it's become a little easier to look that kind of stuff up. Sometimes. Right now, I'm trying to figure out what the situation is for Switzerland, because I have an ongoing client who's probably going to be moving there, and I got to figure out who to ask and how to find out about that, and that's like a challenge that I've been tangling with this past week, and we'll see what happens. Who do you send an email to, and how do you?
Right. Right.
That's where I'm at right now with that.
Sounds like you need a road trip to Switzerland to figure that one out.
Well, that would be fun. I don't know how to. It's fun.
It's a gorgeous country. So looking back, you've been doing this for several years. You've gotten up and running with it. You've done it from your office in California, but also in the Caribbean. What has been the experience from your patients? How have they adapted to this technology and embraced it?
Mm. When I first made the transition across, there was definitely a small group of people who were not in acute need, who opted out. And just sort of anecdotally, in terms of my small sample, those are folks who were not very, tech oriented, maybe a little bit older in that way. But everybody else went across, and they, in varying degrees of seamlessness, or friction, but everybody made that jump. And it's funny too, because I remember in the first couple of weeks of March 2020 thinking, okay, I need to do this. This is coming. You as the news was changing, and then kind of wrestling with the, should I offer it as an option? Should I say, guys, we're doing this? How am I going to handle this? And being concerned about attrition and people dropping out of therapy. And then, here in California, Gavin Newsom said, that's it. We went into the first part of the lockdown. So it kind of cleared up the decision for me.
Mm-hmm.
It was, for me, I have a peer consultation group with a bunch of psychology's girlfriends, and I had spent some time going, wow, what am I going to do? And how do I don't know, do I write a letter? How am I going to do this? And then the next day, boom, the decision was off my plate.
Yeah.
And it actually went rather smoothly. So on my end, I did what I usually do, which was to cook up some documentation and pull things that other people had prepared about how do you do this. So on my website there was a step-by-step, and here's how you do it, and there's a modified version of that right now. But I don't know, most people didn't really even need that. We just kind of set it up and did it, and had to work out the kinks of how does this stuff work, and forward we went. So even now, I still have to work with people about, hey, you need light on your face, and if you can prop that phone someplace, usually that it's clearer because it uses less data if the phone is stable, the camera's stable. It's a little, kind of little tech stuff.
Right.
But that end of it goes okay. The difficulty, it can be in when the connection isn't really stable and clear. The connection the connection technically, and the connection interpersonally. So that sometimes has been a challenge. But overall, I've been very impressed by how people have leaned in to making that transition and going for it. That I know that hasn't been everybody's experience, depending on the population that they're working with or their settings, but for me it's worked well.
Oh, that's fantastic. When you were providing your care via telemedicine from California versus Turks and Caicos, what's different? What do you have to do different, and how do you prepare for those differences?
Yeah, it's funny. I actually wrote a little thing about this recently, where it feels to me like over the last 6 months of going back and forth, it's almost been like a repeated measures design, single subject repeated measures design.
Yeah.
B, California, Grand Turk Island, California, Grand Turk Island, and repeating it. There were the technical requirements of ensuring that I had the fastest and most stable internet connection possible. That has been a really big deal. In fact, after the first time that I was over there and doing my full slate of clients, I didn't even tell them where I was going. You don't tell people when you're going to go to the Caribbean because it's distracting, and it's not about. I mean, I'm there. We're working on them.
Right.
I tried to keep my background and stuff really neutral, so that it's like, oh, I'm working from home, and I was from just my second home. But I actually ended after the first go round where there was a day, thankfully on the weekend, where he lost service, and I actually was hosting a book club of some friends here in California, and lost service entirely, that it became very clear to me that I needed a backup. And so there are 2 ISPs on that island, and we have accounts with both of them. And when we are on island, we have 2 internet providers, and it becomes a cost of doing business.
Oh, wow.
Actually, these last couple, once we got that in place, what we did was, because my husband works remotely as well, is that he'd be on one and I'd be on the other.
Oh,
So
wow.
we
Gotcha.
try to ensure that we have the most bandwidth and the most stable and the strongest signal. Even with that, when you are in a developing country, it's not going to be the same as it is in in a first world country, and so I can feel the difference in it have just it's more physical and cognitive effort to get focused in. Um, for me, it makes a big difference having the literally things like the size of the display. Bigger is better. More presence is more present.
Right.
And so I've come and every trip it's evolved. I've tried different. First I was using an iPad. That was great. The cameras were nice and clear, but it's too small. I keep getting bigger and bigger, and upping my paying more money to get more
Yeah.
bandwidth,
Yeah.
because that doesn't eliminate, but it minimizes the technical requirements or the technical static. In the other way, it I guess the only other thing that sometimes is really different is that over our house on Grand Turk, every so often somebody will say, "Is that a rooster in the background?" Because our neighbors have backyard chickens. And fortunately, I can go, "Yeah, well, yeah, it is. Our neighbors have backyard chickens." And where I live, that's not that unusual.
Right. Oh, gotcha.
In Ventura County, there's neighborhoods that have
Yeah.
backyard chickens, so they go, "Oh, okay," and then on with life. Fortunately, the donkeys that wander around the street there, none of them have gone off in the middle of a session. So I would have to do some explaining around that.
Yeah, yeah. So, like, let's jump into your life while you're on the island, living the island life. You're meeting with patients all day long. You're seeing your last patient. You're done. What does your life look like when you're done seeing patients?
Ooh, well, if it's light, I go outside. If it's not, if it isn't nighttime,
Right.
I go outside. And because it's intense, it actually, I think, is more tiring
Mhm.
there than it is in my, quiet, well-equipped office here in California. Um, our house is right across the street from the beach, and so I'll go down to the beach and just take in the
Yeah.
horizon, take in the light, go stand in the water, and let my brain air out.
Yeah.
Um, Sometimes, depending on how things are scheduled, I'll try to get in the water before, because it's east. I'm on
Oh,
all my
right.
almost
Right.
all my patients. Although I also recently just got licensed in Colorado, so I may have more
Mhm.
Central Time folks, but the vast majority of my patients are Pacific Time, so I play that 3 hour difference
Mhm.
and try to, like, sometimes if I didn't have people scheduled until 10 o'clock, I might go diving in the morning or
Oh,
go
it's
snorkeling.
amazing.
And yeah, it is amazing. It's not all the time. I mean,
Right.
yeah, but it's pretty cool.
So, Laura, being on the island and working from the island, how does this impact your ability to maintain your own mental health as a provider?
Okay. In a word, huge. It's been enormous in helping me refresh. I truly cannot imagine what it must be like for colleagues and just people in general who have gone through the pandemic, living in places where they were contained. People in
Mhm.
urban situations or who don't have ready access to outside space. Because not just when we're being on Grand Turk, but even here in Ventura County, spend a worked on the yard, spent a lot of time outside, walking, all of that. The necessity of being out of the room, whichever room
Right.
we're talking about, and into the world and into my body and into movement and into all of those things. Um, it has been incredible. Regular doses of vitamin C, SEA, or
Hmm.
C, have been awesome. And interestingly enough, I realized recently that I have not taken a day off of work in 18 months. Well, the last time I took a day off of work was in January of 2020. And it's starting to wear on me now,
Hmm.
but because we've gone back and forth, and even though I'm working, doing my full slate and working just as much when we're on Grunter Ground as when we're here. Um, it it hasn't been it hasn't felt the same way it would feel as I think if I hadn't gone that long without a vacation or any time off otherwise. Um, the other thing, though, that has made an enormous difference for my own mental health, well, many other things, all the same stuff as everybody else, is connecting with people. And again, the more I can do that face to face, which means walking with my friends, or meeting, safely distanced in the first part of the pandemic, that's been huge. And regular exercise. We were supremely fortunate here in our town that our local cycling studio or spin studio moved outside. It was one of those things that went into the parking lot under a big tent. Holy moly, that was sanity for a long time, and I'm so grateful that we were able to do that. Um, so those kinds of things. It's what everybody says, and it's really true. Out in the
Right.
world, body, away from the screen, connecting with other people, taking care of just our human animal selves.
Right. So being able to have that instant access to relaxation and nature
Yeah.
allowed you to almost have vacation every day after work or before work.
Or at least a shift. It's
A
funny.
shift,
I
right?
did an Instagram post for the account for our house. Didn't post it on my practice Instagram because don't want to brag. But I remember one session where I was working with a client that I've worked with for a long time, and she was going through the process of being the primary caretaker for an older person in her family who was dying, and dying in a really difficult way. So, and with that kind of thing, there is no making anything better. There's just holding space for that person.
Mm-hmm.
They are bearing witness for their loved one, and I am bearing witness for them, and just being present for all that. And I can remember one day after getting done with one of those sessions and wishing her well, going outside, and it was close to sunset, and I can't even describe the feeling of opening up and taking in the beauty and the peace of the moment. Because that things aren't always that intense, but when they are, a lot of kind of peeling yourself back, and I just put my phone up and took a snap of that and posted it, and it um, it really represented the healing that is available when you turn into the bigger world, and having the privilege and the great good fortune of having a beautiful place ready to hand. Didn't have to construct it; it was right there. But that's been enormous for me.
Uh, it's an amazing story. You're splitting time between California and the island. Are there plans to go there full time or spend more time? I mean, 6 months out of the year is a long time to be
It's a long
spending
time.
there. Right.
At this point, actually, no. But for pretty specific reasons. Part of it is the reason that we were able to go for so long is that all of our guests canceled. That was the initial thing that got us there. And then also the necessity of going and ensuring that the house was in good shape after nearly March to August of it being locked up and untouched. And now that the demand is increasing again, it's a business investment, and so we're hoping to kind of get back onto that footing, and just because of our family life here, my mom is older, and that was the one really downside of being away from home. Besides we have a house and an acre of land and fruit trees and stuff that has to get taken care of, and animals, but that I don't like being away that long. So for both personal and then that end of business, the vacation rental end of business reasons, I think we might go for 3 weeks at a time. Down the road, as we get closer to winding down for retirement, we'll see. It's there's great things about being living in a place like that, and there's also it's it has its own demands and limitations.
Right.
So,
Right.
and we were really fortunate in where we live here in Ventura County. It's pretty sweet. It's
Yeah.
it's close to LA, but it's not in LA. We live in kind of a rural area. There's lots to recommend being here. So, I am supremely fortunate and grateful to have that choice.
Right. But you've got the flexibility, so it's not like you're
Mhm.
tied down to one or the other, and you
Yeah,
get that freedom
yeah,
to move around. Um,
yes.
are, are there are there any other locations on the horizon? Like you mentioned, you got licensed in Colorado. You're looking to get a mountain house as well.
No, no, oof, I hadn't even thought about that part. Now, trying to simplify. The
That's right.
license
That's right.
was simply because Colorado, it makes it easier than some states
Yeah.
to when you are, to get a license when you're already licensed. And I had started seeing somebody initially who was referred by another client, and Colorado was also fairly generous in their interstate temporary
Right.
privileges. And so it was just something that I thought, well, let's talk to the client. Are you interested in doing this? And she was very interested and appreciative that I was willing to do that. It's I'm one of those people like, oh, hey, this is a good idea. Let's go try this. And sometimes it works out well, and sometimes I'm like, oh, what did I get myself into?
Right.
But with more, I think more and more people are getting licensed in multiple states. Certainly, as a psychologist, there's the prospect of PsyPact, although uh, what I found out in the process of pursuing licensure, and are you familiar with
Right.
PsyPact? Is that I should
Well,
probably
yeah, the multi-state. Yeah.
Yep, it's a through the Association of State and Provincial. No, anyway, through
Yeah.
can't actually off top of mind remember the exact organization. It is a move for interstate reciprocity, and
Right.
so for when a state chooses to participate in PsyPact, when that is it is a legislated, I guess,
Hmm.
to join, then providers, other psychologists, practicing psychologists in other states who are members of PsyPact, a psychologist can join PsyPact and then qualify. They have an internal qualification
Hmm.
process. I don't know how similar, different that it is to licensure to begin with, but you just can't sign up. You have to qualify within them,
Right.
and then you have reciprocity and can practice with any of the state within via telehealth within any of the states, or I suppose depending on where you are, actually physically going to different places that are members of PsyPact. California, however, is not, and
Mm.
it's controversial. There's a lot of conversation at the level of the California Psychological Association. There's issues about I don't know what protection of trade or they're just I'm not participating in that things. And so whether or not California will in the foreseeable future, we'll have to wait and see. One of the provisions of PsyPact is that even if you are licensed in a PsyPact state, you cannot participate unless you are physically officed in that state.
Mm.
So even though
Okay.
Colorado's in, and I'm licensed in Colorado, I cannot apply to be and go through the process of getting qualified through PsyPact because I don't have a physical office there.
Gotcha. So even the virtual, it doesn't count then.
Nope, you got to be physically officed.
Interesting.
They're very clear about that, and it makes sense.
Right.
In a way, it
Right.
makes sense because.
Are you looking to expand your business beyond this one patient in Colorado? So just for this one
Oh
patient?
well, if someone in Colorado contacted me, yeah, and I mean,
Sure. Yeah.
then sure, but it at this for me at this stage and at my age, my practice is generally runs full.
Hmm.
Uh, I have typically try to. I'm not working full time, like maybe 4 days a week. So I'm not growing my practice. I'm maintaining it, and
Right.
that's a really nice
And
position
you're
to
good
be
with
in.
that. And yeah,
I'm good with
maintain.
that, and at my I'm 63 years old, so at my age that's okay. You know,
Hmm.
that feels right at this point, and so again, I have a lot of gratitude, Ed, about being in the position that I am and being able to do the things I've been able to do.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. So as we wrap up this episode, again, thank you so much for your time. I usually like to ask three questions, uh, past, present, and future. So if you were to go back back into the past, what would you have done different?
I got a lot of past.
Well, really through practice and
Yeah. I would have held better boundaries between time at work and time at home.
mm,
Uh, I would have made less money and spent more time or I would, well, I don't know about made, I would have, I have held that boundary more firmly, because it, there, there was creep and I think I worked too much
hmm
and my kids were, were suffered because of it.
hmm Um, present. What what are the things that make you successful today?
Ooh. Um, Same things that probably have contributed to my being able to do okay all the way along is that I'm really interested in what I do and I'm really interested in the people like, I want to know it. I'm interested in what's going on with my people. Um, that I guess I have a sufficient flexibility and frustration tolerance. I can hang with difficult, sort of thorny situations like the tech stuff.
Right.
And I have no compunctions about asking for help or looking like an idiot or going, okay, hang on a second here, let me figure this out in real time when it has to happen, so that you know, um, by I don't know, it by being able to be transparent uh, about that I have rough edges, don't know everything, and am going to try to figure it out. That somehow people work with me on that one, and so it has really lowered my tension around it when things go wrong,
hmm
or when I don't know how to do something, or the signal drops, or we lose audio, or
Right.
all those kind of standard things. And I hope that, as well as cushioning me, that it also provides a model for the people that I'm working with, that competence and perfection are two different things.
hmm
That you can be competent and fumble, bumble, be imperfect, and okay, fine, let's keep
Right.
going.
Right. It's okay. You'll survive, right? You just roll with it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's a great example. Future. What is the future of healthcare and your profession?
Oh. Well, probably like a lot of other folks, and perhaps even kind of the evolving consensus, we will never go back to how it used to be. I think lots of therapists are going to maintain a hybrid practice. And for a number of us, that includes meeting with patients outside the office more than we ever have before. We haven't talked about it, but one of the other things that I adopted during the pandemic here in California was walk and talk.
Mm,
And wrote myself a gnarly informed consent that, when trying to think about all the possibilities that things could go wrong, but started to meet with people face to face outside, which was just such a relief for the people, for the subset of folks for whom that worked.
hmm
About confidentiality concerns and comfort and all that sort of thing. And I think that I will always maintain that, and more people have done that. Our model of the traditional model of psychotherapy occurring within this contained space, this quiet held space, which has so much virtue to it, it won't go back totally to that it's expanding and evolving, that we will continue to meet virtually, more and more people will find ways to meet, to incorporate outside of the four walls of the office. And I think we'll learn more about how to utilize that as a method, to find out more about its virtues and how we can incorporate that into strategies and treatment planning, as opposed to, oh, we're doing this because we like it or it's nice, but
Right.
because it has actually therapeutic benefit to it. And and that be in these expanded venues, who knows? I mean, whether that's going to give rise to another line of psychotherapy research that
Hmm.
will continue to refine more of what those common factors are and some of the core things that make therapy work and work better for people. Possibly, I would like to think so. But we'll see. We'll see as time
It's
goes on.
it's very interesting. There's psychology has evolved and changed over time, and you're right. A lot of it's happened within the confines of a room, but now innovation is happening outside of that room, and
Yes.
leveraging those same principles. And the walk and talk concept, I've never heard that before, but
Mm.
that absolutely makes sense. As soon as you said it, it resonates. That is such a good way because it's getting into it's getting into the
Body.
patient's world, not bringing the patient into your world, right?
Yeah.
And I could even envision go to a psychologist who goes to the patient's home and does a counseling within the patient's home,
And
and
people
getting to the
do
world.
that to
Hmm.
a small extent in certain populations. Working with people with,
Right.
say, chronic physical, disabilities or illnesses, older people. There's more of that. That's been more the domain of social work, but I think we're going to get out of our boxes more in that way. Um, the the walk and talk thing has been interesting in that in getting feedback from the folks from with whom I've done it. Um, People have reported some, and again, it's small sample and
Right.
limited, so we got to be careful about generalizing here. But that thing about when you're not looking at somebody, eyeball to eyeball, and when there's space around you, sometimes that can be very facilitative. The physical movement, the rhythmic nature of it, to be able to talk about difficult things in a grounding, while you're doing something that helps you stay grounded.
Hmm.
uh, in work with anxiety and with trauma, there's this idea of the window of tolerance. That in order to address things that are inherently disturbing, that disturbance is going to come up. Tension, discomfort, little, sort of the trauma, the echoes of the trauma, and that you're trying working to maintain somebody within that window. Because too much, they're going to flutter, freeze. Too little, there's that avoidance. And I've had people comment that it's in some ways it can be easier to get into things that are harder to tolerate while they're outside and physically moving. On the other hand, there have been times that we've chosen to come back and do a remote session, um, because we wanted that quiet and the focus there.
Hmm.
So, and that's why I say kind of being able to think about that in a little more systematic way, and use it as a way to augment or to enhance an intervention, to be able to think about it, about how's this going to serve my person, how's this going to further the therapy that we're doing, and just have it as another tool in the toolbox.
Yeah. Yep.
So
And adapt to the context and the needs of the patient.
right, and so sometimes it's improvising, but I think as time goes on, we're going to understand more about what its virtues and limitations are, and how to think about that in terms of somebody's individual treatment. And I got to say, when I started doing this with the folks that wanted to do it. Oh gosh, back a year, little, not quite a year ago. Oh, it was just heaven. It was to get out of the office and literally to get away from the screen.
Yeah.
Lots of
Yeah.
bear hugs.
Yeah.
Lots of
Absolutely. Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely.
And I'm
So,
glad to since
um,
we I thought I was going to go back to seeing people face to face when I came back from the TCI at the beginning of August, and no, not here where we are right now. We're
are you
still.
planning to go back to in-person sessions?
I would love to.
Mm,
It's just a matter of when. And
right.
some people do. There's a lot of variation, even with among the the my colleagues about who's doing what and masked and unmasked and
Hmm.
whew, but I'm a little conservative. I like to mitigate risk where I can.
Right. Right.
So I'm holding off, and because my people have taken well to telehealth.
Right. Right. How has your perspective of healthcare changed through this experience of adopting this new technology, starting your
Hmm.
practice, changing how you did things with COVID? How has your perspective changed?
I'm not sure that it's changed really, Brendan. But certainly, um, it's you come back in a way, to quote John Wooden, back to the fundamentals
Yeah.
about rapport, engagement, attunement, um, you know, building that solid foundation, and doing whatever's possible to secure that. Uh, Certainly telehealth and using tech within therapy can open up and go in all kinds of different directions. Virtual interventions and things that can go past the scope of what I've ever done and will probably ever do. So I know it's there. It's not on my horizon.
Mm-hmm.
But I think for me it has um, taken me to reground in the things that we know to be true, which is the relationship is the foundation for all the therapeutic relationships, foundation for all the work that you're going to do, and to do what I can to facilitate and foster that. And that was, the connection, the physical connection, the technical connection. When that's shaky, then we're leaning in to promote the interpersonal connection and trying, if that makes any sense, kind of
Right.
attending to that, not taking anything for granted, and attending to that even more.
That was fantastic. Well, Dr. Laura Forsyth, thank you so much for your time today.
It is my very great pleasure. It's been fun.